From humble beginnings as the main character of a children's book to the star of his own series of films, Paddington Bear has always managed to have a style all his own. And fittingly enough, that style is exactly why people love him so much, be that in the written form or on screen. But even more than that, the success of his movies shows that when done right, children's movies can still appeal to everyone without having to be mature, dark, or adult films disguised as children's fare. And today, I'd like to go over Paddington's forays into live action and specifically why they're the perfect kind of children's movies that have otherwise been dying out in the new millennium. And there will be spoilers for all three movies in the series ahead. So in case you aren't completely caught up yet and don't want anything ruined, you might not want to proceed with this video. This will be the only spoiler warning I'll be giving out. Okay, so as I've touched on in many of my videos concerning Disney and Pixar, there was once a time when the best children's movies were the ones that were made with kids in mind first and foremost, but also made sure to keep the adults entertained as well, sometimes even implying darker elements that enhanced the story if one was looking for it, but worked just as well for those who didn't pick up on it. And above all, these children's movies respected the age of their target audience and made sure to never be too mature for them. But mostly due to the likes of Pixar, many children's movies since the turn of the century have shifted gears and arguably become too mature and complex for the children they're supposed to be for, focusing way more on heavy-handed messaging that adults are more likely to take away from than the kids watching, rather than trying to be fun first and foremost and maybe sprinkle in a valuable lesson or two. Now don't get me wrong here, as I just got through saying, kids movies should most definitely be good and have proper quality put into them. I'm not trying to argue otherwise at all. What I am saying is that writers of children's movies should be more mindful of what their target audience should and shouldn't be exposed to at any given age, which seems to be all but forgotten for the majority of films aimed at children now. Or at least, the ones that are actually any good, anyway. But one exception to this is most definitely Paddington. And I don't just mean the first one, I'm talking about all three movies here. Because in addition to everything else, they do a really good job of maintaining the same tone and atmosphere, to the point that more writers should strive for the sort of total consistency that these movies have. But the point here is, the Paddington movies are absolutely everything that children's movies should be, as well as the kind kids deserve, because first of all, they aren't too mature, not in the slightest. Sure, sometimes they have darker moments, or touch on emotionally heavy subjects, but it never goes too far, dwells on these things for too long, or broaches on subjects children won't understand. Instead, everything remains easy to follow, and above all, simple, which is something that a lot of not just children's movies lack these days, as I went over in another video which you can find a link in the description to. It's not even afraid to add levity to some of those aforementioned moments with some pretty funny gags, which some would say isn't recommended but is something that should absolutely be done in a movie aimed at kids, especially because the writers execute said gags really effectively. Seriously, as a writer myself, I must say it's very impressive. But to stay on topic, the point is that unlike a lot of movies that advertise themselves as made to kids in the new millennium, which seem to be actively ashamed of what they are and go out of their way to appeal to adults as much as possible, the Paddington movies are not only geared to children, but happily wear that fact on their sleeves. Paddington Bear is the nicest, most well-mannered, and sweet as marmalade person you could ever meet, and is a role model for children, somebody on their level that they can look up to and want to be more like, in addition to representing the best friend any child, or adult really, could ever ask for. And while the Brown family is most definitely a bit dysfunctional by comparison, that's the whole point. Paddington is the glue that keeps them together, and ultimately they are very kind, compassionate people themselves despite their superficial problems. To put it another way, these movies understand how children think and is not afraid to embrace that rather than hide from it. As I already said in a video, which you can also find a link in the description too, sometimes it's best to look at a children's movie through the eyes of a child, as that's the easiest way to enjoy it. But Paddington manages to pull off what only the best can do by making adults do that effortlessly. Anybody can watch any of these movies and take the exact same things away from them, which is that of a simple, nice bear going on adventures with his human family. And through every laugh, cry, and triumph, the audience can't help but be engaged with it, kid or adult. And once again, that's exactly what more children's movies should be. Not afraid of what they are, but rather embrace everything that can make childhood wonderful and allow the audience to experience that on screen through the characters, and especially Paddington himself, as he's extremely easy for anyone of any age to sympathize with and root for. But to get into some more specific examples here, the humor in these movies is never forced, as I previously noted. Unlike a lot of children's movies, which can cause quite a bit of whiplash between their mature tone and comedy to try and keep things light, Paddington knows exactly when to use slapstick and when to get serious, and never mixes the two up. Even when it injects humor into an otherwise serious scene, it always goes about it the right way. And even when the humor does take center stage, it's always genuinely funny. Things like Paddington's street chase in the first movie, or Phoenix Buchanan's hijinks in trying to get the stolen treasure, or Paddington having to steer a boat through rapids by himself, just to name a few. That's all funny. And on the flip side, all of the more dramatic or emotional moments to be had in all three films land perfectly and feel completely earned because of the aforementioned way the characters are done. They feel like real people anybody can relate to, and thus the audience feels all of their defeats and triumphs in equal measure. But perhaps one of the best things Paddington gets right is in the villains. Because simply put, while there is a time and place for a more complex villain or two, the best bad guys in children's movies are better off just being evil. But most villains of the new millennium, and especially in the late 2010s and early 2020s, have been made to be sympathetic or tragic, whether it actually fits the story or not. And many have felt that this has been to the detriment of their films rather than something that improves them. And Disney, which is both famously for kids and known for creating some of the greatest villains ever, is especially guilty of that. But Paddington is an outlier in the fact that it has never made that mistake. The villains in all three movies are exactly the kind of villains there should be more of, and not just in kids' movies, but in general. They're all motivated by nothing but greed, are willing to commit any crime, up to and including murder, to get what they want, and all get an appropriate comeuppance in the end. Not once does the narrative ever try to excuse these people's actions or act like the viewers should feel sorry for them. Even when they could have done so in a case like Millicent Clyde, they instead go in the other direction and make it clear that the only reason she wants to clear her father's name is to get rich, and doesn't care in the slightest that it'll cost a sentient creature his life in service of that. In fact, she even resents her father for not doing that himself. And even when an antagonistic character is made out to be sympathetic, the movie very smartly doesn't have him be the main villain, and instead has somebody else fill that role instead. Because among other things, having the Reverend Mother be an evil fortune hunter who has no problem with murder easily makes the extremely conflicted and tortured Hunter Cabot look much more sympathetic and worthy of redemption by comparison. Which, as I spoke about at length in another video, which you can also find a link in the description to, is actually one of the most important functions of a villain overall, and the movie does not let that go to waste. To put it another way, one would almost think that a character as calm and low-key as Paddington wouldn't need a villain in his stories to make them compelling to watch, but by incorporating villains into the narrative of these films, as well as have them play exactly the kind of roles classic villains should, as I listed in the aforementioned video, it does make these stories better. Because not only does a villain help raise the stakes to a more movie-appropriate level, but it allows for something tangible for the characters to fight against as they try to overcome their own problems. And not to mention, they're also a blast to watch. Seriously, Oscar-nominated and critically acclaimed actors deliberately hamming it up as pure evil villains in children's movies? Why can't they give us things like that anymore? One of the biggest reasons Phoenix Buchanan in particular was so beloved in Paddington 2, to the point that it actually revived Hugh Grant's acting career, may just be because he's exactly the type of villain audiences crave but never get to see anymore. But to get back on topic, the point here is that the Paddington movies get absolutely everything right about being children's movies that most others in the new millennium get wrong. And I only just covered the basics here. I could have gone into a much deeper dive with this if I didn't mind making an hour-long video. But that still wouldn't change the fact that the biggest reason for that would boil down to the fact that not once are any of these movies ever ashamed to be children's movies and embrace that aspect of them rather than resist it. And the results are easily some of the best children's movies, or even just movies in general, to be released since the turn of the century, be they live action or animated. Because there's a reason Paddington 2 was so universally beloved, and it was because it wasn't afraid to just be a fun, wholesome film that anyone could enjoy with absolutely no pretenses about it. And audiences like that. It's something they want to see, but haven't been given nearly enough of, especially as far as children are concerned. As I said at the beginning, more filmmakers should really take a few pages out of the way Paddington movies are made, because they might just be among the best examples of children's movies to come out of the entire 21st century. Alright, I think that just about covers everything. So now let me know what you guys think. Do you believe that the Paddington movies are the perfect representation of what children's movies should be, but pretty much no longer are? Or do you believe they're overrated? Or, alternatively, do you believe that they're good, but not the best kids' movies to come out of the new millennium? Whatever the case, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And if for any reason you happen to think I was wrong about what I said, that is absolutely fine. You are entitled to your own opinion, and if you happen to think I completely missed the mark, you are most definitely free to give me a hard stare for it. And thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate all of it, and I hope to see you all next time.